primary purpose for today's flight, other than to obtain lunch, was to test out a new and different camera location and mount. More on that later. Once again, I noticed that people were using everything, except the actual run-up area, as a run-up area at the north end. As a result, I had the actual run-up area all to myself. There were a couple of airplanes using a corner of the pavement over by the paraphernalia building. At least they weren't pointing their tails at any buildings.
Arlington Municipal Airport. Automated weather observation. 1926 Zulu. Wind variable at 06. Visibility 10. Sky condition few 3,200. Temperature 2-3 Celsius. Dew point 1-4 Celsius. Altimeter 2-9er. Remarks. Density altitude 1,200. Thunderstorm. Information not available.
Carl wanted to borrow one of my old cameras to mount on his tail to watch his tail wheel because he occasionally gets a noticeable shimmy on landing, and he wants to be able to tell if it's the tail wheel or one or both of the mains. I didn't see any way to mount it back there, and he asked why couldn't he just use an idle clamp. I had to think about it for a minute and took some pieces and looked at the actual stinger and concluded that it would indeed work. He tried it once with the camera facing backwards and got some interesting results. I thought I would try it with another old camera only facing forward. I thought it might provide an interesting perspective, and maybe I could find out if my landings are really as bad as I think they are. I used that camera, a GoPro Hero 10, for the shots in the first segment of this video, and it is somewhat interesting. The first landing ended up being pretty much as bad as I thought it was, but was downright wonderful compared to what I did when I got home. We wanted to try an experiment on the way home by seeing how some footage would turn out on the camera he had mounted on the tail if I were flying behind and a little bit below him. We agreed to a section takeoff with Carl in the lead. Since his airplane is a bit faster than mine at any given power setting, he agreed to take off at less than full power and climb and cruise at less than his usual power settings. That should, hopefully, give me the ability to keep up. Usually when we do any loose formation work, Carl flies off my wing, so I don't get much practice flying his wing, as is evident in this video. I'll need to work on that some more. The takeoff started fairly well, but I fell behind by the time we made the first turn. I wasn't trying to stay too close in the climb and planned to close up once we were in cruise. The fact that it was a bit bumpy until we got above the clouds didn't help. As we leveled off in cruise, I wanted to see if I could get into a position directly in trail. I kept getting battered around by his wake and couldn't hold position where I wanted to, and moved in and out a few times to give it various tries. Carl then suggested that I drop down a little lower and come in under the wake. That worked a lot better, as it was much easier for me to get into and hold position. The only drawback to that position is that the way these GoPros focus, an object begins to get small very quickly when moving away from the camera, so I couldn't quite get the shots that I wanted to, but it was fun giving it a go. I was actually closer to Carl than it appears in this video, but to get close enough to get the kind of shot that I would like to be getting would require getting closer than I would feel comfortable with. Maybe someday when I have more experience. Sometime in the near future, we will need to try this experiment again with my camera turned around and Carl flying behind me. Once we finished playing around, we decided to head for home. That took us very near to the Bear Gulch fire again. It was still burning like crazy, and in fact, I think it has gotten noticeably bigger. There is a link to some photos in the description below. Passing the Olympics, there was yet another fire, which I think is fairly new, at the northeast end of the Olympics and was pumping out quite a bit of smoke. The wind was mostly right out of the south, so the smoke was being blown northward and fortunately didn't affect us this time. Unfortunately, with all the smoke it is pumping out, that won't last for too long. I sure hope they can get the upper hand on that fire sooner rather than later. When we got home, there was a lot of traffic at Arlington. Fortunately, a lot of it cleared out as I neared, but there was still enough to make things interesting. There was a 172 in front of me shooting touch and goes, and a Beech Duchess, a light twin, coming in behind me. I got there just about a minute too late. A minute earlier and I would have been able to turn in front of the 172, but as it was, I got there just about the same time he did. So as not to spook him, I let him go first. Sadly, he flew a wider than necessary pattern and waited a long time to turn base. A couple of times after turning base, I considered going around to give myself more room. I was watching him on final, and he was taking a long time to clear the runway. I should have gone around, but figured it would work. It sounded like the Duchess was getting closer to me, and I was in a real hurry to get down and clear. Not a good mindset for making a decent landing. Again, I could have gone around and given it another try, but I didn't. The result was a less than stellar arrival. It all worked out in the end, but was nowhere near as graceful as it could have been.